Namaste Saraswati Devi Charini Nivisitya Sinyamari Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Prabhaktavinda. We turn off the fluorescent lights.
So can you see the one?
Yeah, very good. Krishna Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare.
this mantra meditation which we just practiced is the solution for what we're going to talk about next. We're going to talk about the problem. Usually you talk about the problem first, then you identify the solution. First you identify the problem and then find the solution. We're going to work tonight backwards since we just experienced the solution. So the topic for tonight is recognizing our erratic mind.
Do you want to read this now?
You can pass them on now, yeah. So this chanting helps to calm the mind and let's examine some of the ways and some of the dangers of not calming the mind. Does anyone have experience of an erratic mind?
What do you mean erratic?
Erratic. Is your mind always calm and peaceful? Erratic means, what's the...
Here and there.
let's see, what's the definition of erratic? I mean, we all know what it means, right? But do we really know?
Errors?
What?
Errors?
Not even or regular in pattern or movement, unpredictable.
Monkey
That's
mind.
what's erratic mean. Monkey mind, it's called. It's here, it's there, it's all over the place. Has anyone ever experienced that? That's all that hands go. So what are some examples of an erratic mind that you've experienced? Worrying. Worry about things. Maybe this will happen, maybe that'll happen. Maybe we start with thinking of this and we end up way over here. Because we're worried about this, and what if that happens, what if that happens? Some people that can turn into a disease, right? There's, I don't know if it's schizophrenia, paranoid again. Paranoid schizophrenia, right? There's mental diseases, and people worry so much, they can't function. The world's going to collapse, and they just, right? The mind takes over. So it's not, I mean, we can laugh at these things because they affect us, but they can have severe consequences if not controlled. Some people can really control them. Somebody had their hand? Yes.
You want another one?
Yeah.
Sometimes someone will say something to me, and I'll go off on a crazy journey, thinking of what they really meant when they said that.
Yeah. Yeah, the mind likes to run, right? It's here and there. And it
Yeah, I've experienced that.
You want to focus on doing something, but mind doesn't let you do it. Just going.
We're trying to do this. I've experienced this before, right? My work is with computers, and I'm trying to write some computer program, or I'm trying to solve a particular problem, and then I end up, especially the internet's there, right? You open a browser, you click a link, you check your email, and you end up 20 minutes later and say, oh, wait a minute, I was supposed to be doing this other thing. They actually have programs now. I think Google has one. They have programs you can install on your phone and your computer that keep you from doing other things. Like, it'll turn off the internet, it won't let you launch a browser. Like, there's different ways it works that you tell it what you want to focus on, and it won't let your computer do anything else for a specified amount of time, 15 minutes, an hour or something. Why? Because of the erratic mind. The mind is gone. So this is the problem. So let's turn to your book. We'll just get a little bit of a definition, further definition. Chapter 6, text 5 and 6. We're going to read 2 verses. I wrote them down right. This just helps basically what we just talked about, right? So text 5, chapter 6, text 5. One must deliver himself with the help of his mind and not degrade himself. The mind is the friend of the conditioned soul and his enemy as well. And then text 6. For him who has conquered the mind is the best of friends. For one who has failed to do so, his mind will remain the greatest enemy. So we don't want that, right? So this just describes it gives some prescription. I mean, it's telling us we should deliver ourselves, not degrade ourselves. And if we're not careful, that's what will happen if we don't control the mind. We become degraded. And we see this in society. We see people who let their desires of their mind take them in different directions and do horrible things to themselves and to others. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the reasons that this mind is, some of the dynamics involved. One thing that's notable that doesn't appear obvious to us, but when we examine it, it's true, that the mind is actually very simple. It's not capable of complex thought, like the intelligence. The mind, sometimes it's called the master sense. We have the five senses. The mind is like, it controls the senses, we hope. Sometimes the senses might control it. But the mind is basically, if we examine very close, it's only ever doing one of two things. It's accepting something or it's rejecting something. And it might put it in very sophisticated terms. We might be finding fault with some person or some situation, which is another way to reject it. Or we may look for all the ways that this thing can benefit us or we can exploit it, which is another way of accepting. But ultimately, the mind is, all it ever does is accepting and rejecting. And if we look very close with activities, one time I had this experience, and I guess I would challenge is the right word, assign. I can't really assign because this is a voluntary class, but if you had to take credits for this class, I would give you an assignment to go for the next 24 hours and just listen to your mind, watch what your mind does. One day I realized, towards the end of the day, I looked back and I noticed that all day long my mind had been dictating, do this, do that. It's too hot, you adjust the thermostat. Open the window. Okay, you're hungry, get something to eat. Oh, now you're too cold, close the window. Okay, you're tired of sitting, get up and walk around. All day long my mind was giving me these instructions to do things to make myself more comfortable. And I realized towards the end of the day, I said, not one, and I did all those things. I opened the window, cool off, got something to eat, walked around to get some exercise, because I'm just taking for granted that my mind, I should listen to it, right? It's there in my head, it's telling me what to do, and it knows better than I, so let me just do it. And I noticed at the end of the day that not once, not one time did the mind say, okay, thank you, I'm satisfied. Right? It never left me in peace. It was always, okay, I did everything it said, and it just kept asking for more. So when I started to realize, so, why do I just listen to this all the time? Maybe I should say no. It's okay. I'm not going to turn on the air conditioner. It's not that hot. No, you might think you're hungry, but you just ate an hour ago, so you're not really hungry. So I realized that if I just listen to my mind, it'll just dictate and tell me things that I don't actually need to do. Because it's never going to say, okay, you've satisfied me. So I would propose you can do that in the next 24 hours. Just watch your mind, or even for a few hours, a few minutes. But in the course of the day, watch what it tells you to do and see at what point does it say, okay, I'm happy, I'm going to leave you in peace. It never happens. We have to control it. We have to tell it. And that's the point of this discussion is, okay, we identify this monkey mind, this erratic nature. How do we control it? How do we not be controlled by it? So the key to this control, of course, it is important that we just acknowledge that we tend to take it for granted. We tend to think my mind is myself. Right? And I was going to write something, I just remember, but I don't have the marker, so I'll just use my fingers, right? I have 5 fingers for our 5 senses. 5 material elements. Earth, air, fire, water, ether. Senses is kind of a whole other discussion. So that's material elements, right? Earth, air, fire, water, ether. We can accept this as matter. There's 3 other subtle material elements, which are mind, intelligence, and ego. So this is very important because these 8 things are material. So if we understand that the mind, intelligence, and our false ego is that consciousness, that sense that I'm doing something. I'm this body, and those 5 things we mentioned, earth, air, fire, water, ether, and this 5 senses, and our arms, and all the material components of us. And our mind, intelligence, and ego, that's me, that's who I am. That's the false ego, wraps all that up and says, that's me, this is me. I'm in this body, I'm a white American male living in Maryland, and I have this education and that background. All the things that my life has experienced, that's who I am. And so if that's our consciousness, then when the mind talks, we just accept it because it's us. And my mind is part of me, so I should listen to it because I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to X, Y, Z, I want a career, this will make me happy. It's all I. But if we understand earth, air, fire, water, ether, there's 5 material elements, mind, intelligence, and ego, if we understand all those things wrapped up are not us, they're material, and then the soul is separate, then we see the mind from a whole different vantage point. Then we understand, oh, the mind is a material entity, a material dynamic, separate from me. I'm a soul, I'm an eternal soul. Then, when we have that vantage point, that understanding, then we can look at all these monkey mind suggestions objectively. We say, oh, here's a thought, I can accept it or not. It's like the mind can accept and reject. Well, the soul can also accept it, or we can say, oh, my mind is telling me I'm unhappy because this person just said something nasty about me. And the soul can say, well, they're talking about my body and I'm not my body, so it doesn't matter what they say because I'm a spirit soul and what they don't even know me, so I don't have to be bothered by what they said. So I won't get angry and hit them because it doesn't matter. And our mind is saying, no, they just were really mean to you. You should get upset. And we can say, no, I don't want to get upset. So that's an example of a dialogue where we could just look at our mind and say, thank you, but no thank you. I'm not going to act upon that suggestion. I'm not going to accept that thought. So then this erratic nature of the mind, coming and going, accepting, rejecting, we can take a step back. And what's the benefit of doing this? So let's read one more verse. This is in chapter 5, text 7. So this explains the benefit. Maybe someone would like to read that verse. Volunteer.
One who works in devotion, who is a pure soul, and who controls his mind and senses, is dear to everyone, and everyone is dear to him. Though always working, such a man is never entangled.
So this is an important dynamic, this lipyate in Sanskrit says this entanglement, right? So one who controls the mind is never entangled. And we can see this if you just look at the newspaper. Of course, these days, newspapers aren't as common as they used to be. Now it's all digital. But if you look at Twitter or any news feed, you'll see people who, somebody said something, someone else got upset and said something, and it escalates into this whole thing, and they become entangled, right? Because of the inability to control their mind, they now have a lawsuit or a court case or half the world mad at them or whatever. Whereas if some other people you know or have experienced, they control their mind and they're thoughtful and they don't react to everything, they don't get entangled. They're free to move about. So this idea of entanglement, when we don't recognize that the mind, that erratic nature of the mind is not us, and when we don't recognize the need to control it, then we just act upon it. And because it's a material entity, and the accepting and rejecting in the mind is basically to satisfy one thing, is to give senses, the pleasure to the senses. The senses say, I'm hungry, I'm hot, I want this, I want that. Whatever, we're all different, so we have different values, but when I was young, it was sex, drugs, rock and roll, right? That's what young people gave them pleasure. No? For one person it's money, someone else it's power, someone else it's fame. Everyone has a certain thing that motivates them to get that they're seeking after. And so the senses and the mind tend to look through the world through that filter. This is important to me, and this is not. For an artist, it's to get their paintings in a show in New York. For a musician, it's to do a concert with 1 million people. Whatever your propensity is, there's some correlated pleasure resulting from that. And so you look at the world and you say, yes, this will help me, this will not help me. So if we don't control the mind and just guide it, it will entangle us in so many different situations. And so we have to, first of all, we have to recognize and not just take it for granted, not just listen to all these voices and act upon it. And how we do that is through this meditation that we just talked about, this chanting. But it's important, I think, at least to me it's important, to understand that this isn't a trivial thing. It's very powerful in both directions. It's powerful. The entanglement can be very powerful. If we don't control the mind, the entangling effect can be very difficult to extricate ourselves from. But the ability also to control it and engage the mind is very powerful. And powerful in the sense that, just give some examples of how, of course you've all experienced, so it's not that it's a new thing, but things we do with our mind are stored in the brain as though they're real. So I'll give an example. In the 60s there was a book published called Psycho-Cybernetics. And I think it's linked to this, a few years later, this thing called neuro-linguistic programming became popular. I think it's really linked to the same science. But basically, this book, Psycho-Cybernetics, the concept is that they took a group of basketball players and they split it in half. Let me back up. Just hold that thought for a minute. There's two groups of basketball players. We're going to come back to that. So there's a story in the Vedas, the bodies of truth, this spiritual knowledge, about a yogi who was meditating. And he was meditating in his mind in a very elaborate procedure for making spiritual advancement. And during this meditation, he touched his finger to a substance, this rice. He was going to offer some rice. He was making a nice offering. And he touched his finger to this rice in his mind, meditating. He was very poor. He didn't actually have a kitchen. He lived in the forest. But in his mind, he's thinking, well, I can make this nice offering and offer it to the Supreme, which is what some spiritual practices have different methods of worship. And so in his mind, he wanted to see how hot it was, and he touched the sweet rice with his finger, and it was too hot, and it burnt his finger. And so he woke up, and his meditation was broken, and his finger was burned. So some people would say, well, this is the story. It's a mythological example from some book. And it sounds kind of far-fetched. I'm going to think about something, and my finger is physically going to get burned. So the point of that story is that what we do with our mind is real. Even though we think of real as tangible, I have to actually be in a room and touch things, to drink the water, get the effect. So come back to those two groups of basketball players. So I don't know how they got on this track, but the scientists started saying this, the psycho-cybernetics, which basically is a way to program and teach the mind things. And they wanted to understand how the brain stored memories and how it learned things. And one example I'm going to give is from the 60s. They've done this over and over since then many times. So it's an established fact that this works, that the brain works this way. Basically, the gist of it is what you think of in your mind can be just as, it's stored, the memory stored in the brain is exactly the same as if you had actually done it. but I'm getting ahead of myself. So go back to these two groups. So one group of basketball players, they said practice every day for, I don't know, 3 hours or 6 hours, some number of hours. Every day, go practice basketball, practice your shoot, what do they call where they shoot the basket from a certain distance away, jump shot or something. And then they measured to see how they improved over, I think it was 28 days. They took another group who never touched a basketball for 28 days, but they, for the same amount of time, they just sat and meditated, and in their mind they visualized practicing, dribbling, shooting, and then they did all the same types of exercises that the group was told to do. These people were told, picture yourself doing that in your mind. But they weren't on the court, they didn't have basketball, they just sat in the chair. So at the end of 28 days, and somehow 28 days, it was either 21 or 28, I think it was 28 days, but I think 21 was the key number. If you did it less than that, you didn't get the results. You had to do it a certain amount of time for the brain to get it. And it could be 21 or 28, I forget, but there is a number at which the brain, it works, and if you don't do it that long, it doesn't work. So at the end of the 28 days, they took the two groups and they tested them. So, okay, go shoot baskets in the court. And the group that never touched the basketball, never went on the court, performed just as good, in some cases better, than the court who practiced every day. And they were stunned. They were like, but they hadn't touched the basketball. How these guys every day were out there shooting. And so their muscles are getting toned and they're able to hit the basket at X number of percentage or whatever.
So did they never touch basketball? Or
The other group never touched the basketball.
Like in their life?
During the month.
28 days.
They tested them at the beginning.
Right.
And for 28 days, you go practice, you think you're practicing. And they tested them at the end of the 28 days.
They had knowledge of basketball before.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they were basketball. Well, I think they were all basketball players. I don't know if it works. Yeah, theoretically it could still work, but I think this was a basketball team.
Right.
But they measured their improvement. So on this day, they all scored this, and on this day, they scored this way. So the point, so this is one example. Again, this was a book published in the 60s. They've done the same types of studies repeatedly since then, and the same results come out. The point is that when you have to think of it very clearly, you have to really control the mind to visualize and imagine it, and you have to do it consistently for a long period of time, several weeks or a month. But what they discovered in that and subsequent studies was that as far as the brain recording the memory and the brain learning the muscular and neurological effects to get better, at that level, whether you did it or thought you did it is irrelevant. It's the same. It affects the nervous system in the same way. So the point is that the mind is very powerful. And if we don't control it, it will get us to believe something happened that may not have happened. Or if we tell it, no, do this, think this way, and be happy in this situation, it can modify. I can give another example. There's a book called Blink, and it's about micro-expressions. And you may have heard, this is recent, in the last 5 or 6 years, I think it was published. And the book is about micro-expressions from the perspective of how to tell if people are lying. In fact, there was even a movie some years ago about it. I think it was called Lie to Me or something. There's a series where experts who are trained in this, if you film somebody, ask them questions, and they slow it down, a movie moves at 30 frames a second. That's when you take a video, it's 30 frames a second. So if you slow it down and look frame by frame, you can see these little expressions in people, their muscles, that you or I wouldn't see, but a trained person would notice. And what they found was the nervous system is hardwired. So when somebody lies, they can't hide it. They could hide it to a normal person, but their face, their nervous system will reveal that they're lying. That was this book basically proved. This science, it's a science, it's a micro-expression thing. There's a PhD doctorate who wrote the book, and it took his results and made this book. But I found even more fascinating, and that was very interesting, that you can learn how to read these expressions and you can tell if someone's lying or not. But the science behind it, the reason it works, which I found really fascinating, is it works in reverse also. So, because the muscles are hardwired in the nervous system, if you force yourself to smile, it will make you happy. Because it's hardwired. So the muscles, it feels really goofy. It's like, I don't feel like smiling because I really, but if you do, and it's a hard thing to do, but they prove that in the same way when you're lying, it will come out in expressions and people can, your eyes will blink. Like for one example that I can remember is when a genuine smile, when somebody's happy, the eyes up here, the smile of course is there, but when you're really happy, right up here next to your eyes, it crinkles up. I don't know if I can do it because it's something that it's natural. But when you just smile and you're not happy, it doesn't crinkle. You can't make it crinkle. It only does it when it's a real, when you're actually smiling. That was one of the things this book taught. And so there's dozens of those kinds of examples. There's like, I don't know, 128 muscles in your face to make you smile. It's like an easy thing. It actually takes more muscles to frown than it does to smile, surprisingly enough. It's harder to be unhappy than it is to be happy. But anyway, the point of all this, the book, and the point I'm trying to make is that because it's hardwired, the nervous system and the muscles in the mind, it's all hardwired, it can work in reverse, that if we tell our mind and we tell our body and we just act in ways like meditating or thinking good thoughts or controlling it, then it gets controlled. And that erratic mind becomes less erratic, and then we can calm it down and we can control it. The first step is to understand it's not us. It's a separate, I don't have to accept point blank verbatim what my mind says. I can question it. I can say, well, okay, that's a nice thought, but should I accept that thought? Should I counter it? You know, and then that's kind of the intelligence kicks in and other things. And so then it can be hard to do that if we're just always engaged in mature activities, which is why this chanting that we did, the japa and the music earlier is so powerful, is because that using spiritual vibrations, spiritual substance, immediately takes us transcendence. It takes us out of the realm of the material energies, and so then it's much easier to look and see the mind as a separate thing. Otherwise, we can get so caught up in the illusion that we think we are. It's like, in Britain, I think it's in Britain, they have this phrase, lost the plot. You don't hear it in America so much. But someone who's lost the plot, it's like if you're in a play, and it's a really good play, and you're an actor, and then when the play ends, you just want to keep playing that role, because you were a king, and everybody obeyed you, and so even when you're not on the stage, you want to still be the king, and so someone who's lost the plot, they lose touch with reality, and they just act a certain way, and they think it's normal, and everyone else is like, this person's out there. So that's what they call it. Oh yeah, they lost the plot. They kind of lost touch with reality. So that's what can happen if we don't control the mind and we don't see it. We start listening to what it says, and it can drive us batty, and it can drive everyone else batty. So the goal is this verse we just read, that we want to control it. And what's the result of controlling it? What we just read, who can remember a key word in there? A couple key words.
Never entangled.
5-7. I'm sorry, what?
I said never entangled.
Never entangled, right? We don't get entangled. We're not forced to do things. What does entangle mean? It means you're forced to do something you don't want to do. They're dear to everyone. Who in here wants to have everyone as their enemy? No. So you're dear to everyone means you're peaceful, you get along with people. And everyone is dear to you. And although working, you're never entangled. So this is, there's more we could say. It's a deep topic. But this is the main point I guess I want to impart you with is just, it's extremely powerful just being able to identify and recognize, oh, this is my mind. It's being erratic. Just that right there is very powerful. Because as soon as you see it, it's like, oh, okay, well now I don't have to react to it. Because I am not my mind. The mind is separate. And And as they say in not just computer science, I know I experienced it with computer programming, but it's probably true in any field of work. I don't know in engineering, right now, told me. I know with computer debugging code, the hardest part of the whole problem is finding the bug. Once you find it, fixing it, you'll know how to fix it. Once you see, oh, there's the problem. Well, now you just fix it. And it might be a lot of work to fix it, but the fixing part is relatively easy. Where all the money is spent and where all the time goes and where everyone like pulls their hair out, stays up all night, is trying to find the problem. Because something's going wrong and you can't figure out why. And so they spend a lot of money and time on debugging software and systems. Is that the same in engineering, physical, not just computer science, but tangible?
Yeah, I think so.
Right? It's like identifying the problem. Once you identify it, the solution, I'm not going to say the solution's easy. The solution might be hard, but the solution generally takes care of itself. Like, oh, we need to do this and this and this. But finding the problem is very difficult. And so that's the point here, is recognizing the erratic mind is that when we're able to see the nature of the mind, it's not us, and watch it go all over, that's okay. Just doing that, okay, that's the biggest part of the problem. Because then we have mechanism, we can chant, we can do other things to solve it. But more often than not, we don't see it, and the mind takes us down some road, and we end up all entangled. It's like, how did I get here? Oh, wow, I got angry, I got this, I got that. And it's like, oh. And so that's, I guess, the end of my formal talk. Questions? Does anyone have any questions?
It seemed to me that at the beginning of the class you said that the mind can only do two things. The mind can accept or the mind can reject. And then you explained how your mind was giving you orders all throughout the whole day and was never satisfied. So then that seems like a different function to me.
No, it's accepting and rejecting. It's saying, this is not comfortable. Don't accept this situation or reject it. So if it's too hot, open the windows. So you're rejecting the circumstance. I have to make some adjustment. Right? It's not you're hungry. You're rejecting this feeling. Your stomach. So what is hunger? My stomach's growling, or I'm feeling some lack of something, and so you're rejecting that that's a normal thing. That's something you have to do about. Or you're accepting some gratification. I need to eat something. I will eat something. I will accept some foodstuffs, and that will make me happy. I won't accept that foodstuff because I don't like broccoli. I will like ice cream or whatever it is your tastes are. But you're accepting some gratification.
So then basically it's the mind accepts and rejects based on the senses, what the senses are dictating.
Yes. Yeah, the senses of the mind are very much linked. That it's
so you might not be hungry, it might just be your tongue wants something.
Right. Your tongue is and it goes in both directions. The mind may be saying, oh, feel hungry so I can eat, I want to eat something. But the mind, it's really the master sense. It's either being dictated by or dictating to the senses. That all the mind is interested in is satisfying the senses. And so it's accepting and rejecting based on giving gratification to the senses or avoiding pain for the senses. That's all it's really capable of doing. Yes.
I have a question. Like, for example, we are out somewhere and somebody tries to do some unfair thing to us or tries to take credit of what we did and tries to kind of cheat us. So at that point, what should we do? Like, because we know it's the person whom is cheating is me. I'm the soul, so it's not directly eating me. But do I, at that point, take action? What is being done to my body, or what is what plot has been against myself, or how should I deal at that situation?
Well, it's a good question. It brings in some other topics as to our value system and you know who our purpose in life. But the answer, I would say, it falls into one of two categories. It depends. Is what this person or this situation or whether the attack or they're trying to take advantage or whatever, is it something tangible that I could suffer from or something I'm responsible for? Is it just my false ego? Right? Someone could say they attacked me because they said they took credit for my work. It's like, well, so what? It's just we want fame, adoration, we want to be famous. So they're attacking me, but like, doesn't really matter. Versus they're trying to take my money or they're trying to hurt me or, you know, I have a responsibility to protect my body or protect the people around me. Or it's that this money, I worked hard for it and I need to pay my bills. So I'm not going to just like let them cheat me. It's like, no, you gave me the wrong change. I gave you a 20 and you only gave me $6, but you should have given me. So then we can say something because that's like, well, wait a minute, this is, it's inappropriate. But if what they're saying is simply, you know, well, you're not very smart, are you? No, I'm not very smart. You may be a PhD, and you may be much smarter than them, but like, so some kinds of things, it's like, what's the value and what is it that's being attacked? Is it my false ego, my pride? Or is it actually they're trying to do damage that I need to protect myself from? So I would, first of all, put those two categories, because based on the answer, then it's going to be a different response. Some people would argue, no, they called me a name, I have to hit them, because that's how I was raised, and I can't let them get away with it, because if I let them get away with it, where other people were raised differently, and they'll say, no, it doesn't matter, we just taught it. Does that answer your question? Yes.
Yeah.
So does this make sense, first of all? Does anything I've said help one to... So in the beginning, when I asked, for example, the erratic mind, almost everyone raised their hand, they've experienced an erratic mind. Yeah? So does anything I said help to understand, A, the nature of that and why it happens, and B, how to deal with it?
Yes, the question is, how do we deal with the mind? By intelligence? Or so we understand that this is not good. The erratic mind is not good. So this is intelligent works, right? And what's the connection? How do we manage to serve the mind, or to make mind serve us?
So that's a really good question, and I think we don't have much time here. There's one set of verses here I can read briefly. So this may be too many verses to read. There's a nice set of verses. It's kind of a whole other topic though. But so yeah, it's by using the intelligence. The short answer is, but more specifically using a spiritual intelligence. By engaging, you need something outside of. So if you're stuck in a well, you can't get yourself. You need something outside of yourself. Somebody needs to throw a rope or come. You, in your own situation, you can't get out. You need something from outside yourself. So because the mind is material and the intelligence, right? Earth, air, fire, water, ether. There are three subtle things. What were the three subtle ones? Mind, intelligence,
Ego, false ego.
false ego. They're all material. So you need something from outside of that well, that material, to help ultimately control it, because the intelligence will help, but intelligence can be polluted. There are people whose minds convince them to do very horrible things, and their intelligence figures out how to do it. Right? Read the page, look at the news. People do things that took a lot of intelligence, but it wasn't a very good thing to do. It wasn't very smart, and it was harmful to themselves or others. So intelligence itself can be polluted if it's not purified. And so you need something outside of material strata. And so that's where the chanting comes in. by chanting these spiritual sound vibrations, then you get purified and you're able to see and control the mind. You're able to separate and see, oh, I'm a spiritual being. My mind is something else. That's the first step. Now that I see that, by engaging with spiritual practices and spiritual energy, you're able to cut that tie, that controlling influence. And that's spiritual intelligence. Yes, Rajesh?
So, well, in the similar line, actually, another thing could be that if intelligence could control the mind, two things should be there. One is that intelligence is smart enough that it can differentiate between right and wrong. And second is that it should be strong enough that if it figures out that this is not correct or this should be done, so it should be strong enough to enforce that.
Yeah.
And most of the time it is not. That we know that this is not right, we know we should focus, but we still can't help ourselves. Still mind takes you away.
Yeah. So we need something from outside. We need to, and that's why the spiritual dimension is so important. And that's the seat of our identity. The soul.
I did not understand the question.
He's saying that the intelligence can control the mind only as long as the intelligence is not polluted and strong enough. Okay? So some people, and we've experienced this, our mind tells us do something, I'm like, no, that's not a good thing to do, but somehow it forces us, and we just do it anyway. And so they're preparing, we're going to wrap it up here. I'm just going to read a couple verses here that talk to that dynamic, and then we can discuss it during prasad, while we eat dinner. So the question is this is a similar question. I'm just going to read these verses and then we'll break up, we'll have dinner, we can discuss one-on-one. So Arjuna's he's having this discussion with Krishna and Bhagavad Gita. He asked the same question. Oh, descendant of Vrishni, he's asking the Supreme Krishna, by what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? Right? Why do we do things we know we shouldn't do? This is text 36. If you want to follow along, you can. 336. 337. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, it is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material mode of passion, and later transformed into wrath, which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world. So Arjuna is asking, why do we do things we don't want to do? And Krishna says it's lust only. 38. As fire is covered by smoke, as the mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo is covered by the womb, the living entity is similarly covered by different degrees of this lust. Thus, the wise living entity's pure consciousness becomes covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and burns like fire. So listen to this next verse. The senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting places of this lust. This is chapter 3, text 4. Through them, lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. Therefore, O Arjuna, best of the Vartas, in the very beginning curb this great symbol of sin, lust, by regulating the senses, and slay this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. The working senses are superior to dull matter, mind is higher than the senses, intelligence is still higher than the mind, and he, the soul, is even higher than the intelligence. Thus, knowing oneself to be transcendental to the material senses, mind, and intelligence, Almighty armed Arjuna, one should steady the mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence, Krishna consciousness, and thus by spiritual strength conquer this insatiable enemy known as lust. So in other words, we have to ultimately control it. We have to come to the consciousness of understanding I'm a spiritual being. I'm not this body. I'm not this mind. I'm not this intelligence. Situated in that identity, then we can control the mind and the intelligence and the false ego. If not, we'll be controlled by them. So ultimately, it's a question of identity. When we understand who we are as spiritual beings, then we're now outside of the well, right? We're now everything inside stuck in the well is mind, intelligence, ego, and material worlds. So hopefully that answers your question. That's the best answer I can make. So we can discuss some more. Thank you all for coming. I think we have some announcements, and then we'll have dinner, which will serve. You can stay where you are. We'll serve you.